So today we'll be doing a little more theoretical or background information on EC2 services, and then we're going to do some hands-on work as well. That'll be the fun part of the class. But first, we just want to get some background on EC2 and kind of give you a broader perspective on the service. So let's get started. So like I said, this is going to be a lot of the background on EC2, a lot of theoretical work, and understanding some of the compute types and pricing models is important. I'll point out to you the things that I think you should memorize or have easy to, ready at your fingertips. And then there's some stuff which you don't necessarily have to worry about memorizing. You can always look it up, but you have to have a good, understanding. So EC2, it stands for Elastic Cloud Compute, and it's a service. You'll hear this about lots of AWS things. Okay, they're called services, RDS, Relational Database Service. Lambda, it's a service. EC2, it's a service. So you remember we talked about in introductory to cloud computing, you have infrastructure as a service. So all of these things that AWS has are called services. So you get a server, but the EC2 category of things is called a service. So it's the EC2 service, which allows you to stand up or spin up or create resizable compute capacity. Right, and that's really important to understand that this is the difference between cloud computing, EC2, cloud computing, AWS, and being on premise. I can stand up an EC2 instance that has 1 CPU and 2 gig of memory, and tomorrow I can change it to 2 CPU and 4 gig of memory. I don't have to know when I start it up what my needs are. That's why it's called elastic. It's one of the most important things for you to understand about EC2 because, for example, if you start working in the world of migrations, customers will say, well, right now on premise, I have this, and I think it's going to require, this much memory and this many people to connect to it. And you're like, that's fine. We can start wherever you want, but then we can go down, we can go up. It's very easy to do. And it's one of the key features of virtual machines in AWS. So EC2, Elastic Cloud Compute, it's a virtual machine. Again, let's rewind back a little bit to our initial class, which was on introductory to cloud computing, right? So I've got my hardware underneath, and then we put out hypervisor, right? Remember, we're virtualizing. We are creating segments or tenants. Remember, we talked about tenants. So each tenant, here they've called it a guest. So I've created multiple EC2 instances on one host server. So the underlying hardware, it's one big piece of hardware, but I split that hardware up and I get multiple tenants. So when I spin up an EC2 instance, I'm getting one of these virtual machines that's running on a piece of hardware. Okay. And, the way they split it up is going to be in a way that's optimized for cost and for operations for AWS. But theoretically, this can be any operating system. This can be any operating system, and the number of CPU and the amount of memory per instance can be different. Now, that's not exactly the way AWS does it, but theoretically, that can be the case. Okay.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
Really quick. Like when we say elastic, how do you know if you need like more powerful machine or like more RAM or more hard drive? Like, does the system automatically detects it and suggests that to you, or like based on the usage, or let's say your website is not responding, then you realize, okay, I need a more powerful machine. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question that will take me an entire lesson to explain. I will I will explain a little bit of it at the break if you'd like to stay on and listen, if that works for you. But
Okay, okay, thank you.
that simple answer is this: there are metrics for every EC2 instance, and you can monitor those metrics, and then based on those metrics, you can tell Amazon to. So, for example, if one metric is the CPU usage, if the CPU usage goes too high, you can tell Amazon to start up another instance for you. Remember, there's two ways of scaling. You can scale up, meaning I can get more CPU and more memory, or I can scale out. So I can get one instance with one CPU, then I can add another one and another one and another one. So you can scale out. That's the easiest way to do it when you detect problems. But there's probably a whole lesson dedicated to auto scaling and uh, monitoring. Great question. Okay, so I've used these terms interchangeably: device, computer, server, host. So these are all things that we've used to talk about when we're talking about routing and network. When we talk about EC2, these are instances, these are servers. So we'll talk about hosts, we'll talk about servers. Um, Sometimes people will call them computers, but a server is really a high power computer compared to what you might have as your desktop, right? And what does it include? It includes the operating system. It's going to include the memory. It's going to include the CPU. And then we talked about security groups a little bit during the last session, but it's essentially your host-based firewall. So you have what's called an AMI, or Amazon Machine Image, which has all the information about the operating system. You have the EBS volumes, which is your disk, your instance type, which is your CPU type, and then of course the number of CPUs, and then your security group. And that all together is your EC2 instance. All right, so with EC2, it's generally pay as you go, although there are different pricing models, and we'll talk about some of them. Generally, it's pay as you go. Very quick to start up, as you guys have already had experience with. It takes just a minute or two. You can specify everything that you need very quickly, very easily with the console. And again, to start, to create, to stop or terminate instances is also very easy to do through the console. And stopping and terminating are two different things, just to keep that in mind. So stopping, rebooting, and terminating are three different things. Rebooting is an operating system reboot. It's like when you try and reboot your computer, that's exactly what a reboot is. When you stop it, it's no longer available to you through the console, or it's not working. The image, the EC2 instance is still there. You don't lose any information, but everything is still there. So you can start it up again, and it becomes available. I guess you can think of it as like powering down your computer. And then terminating it, if you terminate it, it's gone. Everything you put into that server or onto that server, it disappears and you cannot recover it. All right, folks, have a wonderful evening.